Margaret sat at her kitchen table, staring at the words in a text message that made her stomach tighten. Should she reply? Defend herself? Explain? Again? But then something shifted. Instead of crafting a response, she simply put down her phone and walked away. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't in years: peace. Not every battle needs to be fought, and sometimes silence is the most powerful response. Today, we're uncovering 9 crucial moments when staying silent can protect your happiness, your energy, and your well-being. When someone is committed to misunderstanding. Margaret sat across from her niece at the family brunch, feeling the familiar frustration creeping in. No matter how she worded it, her niece twisted her words, turning a simple conversation into an argument. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. For years, Margaret tried explaining, reasoning, and defending her thoughts. But today, something different happened. She paused, took a sip of her coffee, and said nothing. Instead of engaging, she let the moment pass. And for the first time, she saw something new in her niece's face: confusion. Without Margaret's usual defenses, there was nothing left to push against. The argument fizzled before it even started. Some people don't want to understand you. They want to be right. No amount of reasoning will change that. The moment Margaret realized this, she permitted herself to stop explaining herself to people determined to misunderstand her. Silence wasn't giving up. It was choosing peace. And in that peace, she found something even more valuable: freedom. But silence isn't just about avoiding arguments. Sometimes it's about keeping your energy protected from negativity. Up next is a moment where silence keeps your world light and your heart unburdened. 2. When someone is fishing for drama. Margaret's phone rang, and she saw Nancy's name flash across the screen. She hesitated. Nancy had a habit. Every conversation turned into gossip, complaints, or dragging up old conflicts. Margaret used to feel obligated to listen, nodding along, offering sympathy. But lately, she noticed how drained she felt after every call. It wasn't just the negativity. It was the way Nancy seemed to feed on it, needing an audience to keep the drama alive. So this time, Margaret tried something new. She let the phone ring. No rush to pick up, no need to engage. She simply chose silence. A few minutes later, Nancy sent a text. "Call me." "You won't believe what happened." Margaret smiled. She would believe it. She had been listening to it for years, but today she was reclaiming her time. Silence is powerful. It starves negativity. It closes doors on conversations that do nothing but weigh you down. Margaret didn't owe Nancy her energy, and she certainly didn't owe drama her peace. The result? She felt lighter, and when she did call Nancy back days later, she kept the conversation brief, positive, and controlled. Not every silence needs to be forever. Sometimes it's just a pause to remind yourself that you have the right to decide what deserves your time. But what about situations where people are waiting for your response, expecting you to engage? That's where the next lesson comes in. Knowing when your voice won't change a thing. 3. When your opinion won't change the outcome. Margaret had always believed in speaking up, sharing ideas, and engaging in discussions. But one evening, at a family dinner, she found herself in the middle of a heated debate about politics. Her grandson was adamant about his views. Her son-in-law had his own strong opinions. And Margaret? She knew exactly where she stood, but she also knew that nothing she said would change their minds. She had a choice. She could jump in, argue, and leave the dinner feeling exhausted, or she could simply sit back, enjoy her meal, and let them go back and forth without her. Instead of debating, she observed. She realized how much energy she had spent over the years trying to change minds that weren't open. And the truth? She didn't need to win this argument. Her peace was more valuable than proving a point. The next time someone pulled her into a conversation where opinions were set in stone, Margaret remembered this night. Instead of trying to be right, she chose to be at peace. Because the real wisdom of aging isn't in speaking the loudest. It's in knowing when to speak and when to let silence be your answer. But some silences are even more powerful. What happens when emotions take over and you're on the verge of saying something you might regret? That's exactly what we'll explore next. 4. When you're feeling emotional and might regret your words. Margaret sat in her favorite chair, her fingers gripping the armrest as she fought the words bubbling to the surface. Her daughter had just said something that stung, a careless remark about how Margaret never really understood how hard it was to raise kids these days. Margaret's heart pounded. How could she say that? Had she forgotten the years Margaret spent working 2 jobs, making sure there was always food on the table? The sacrifices? The sleepless nights? The old Margaret would have responded immediately, sharp, defensive, needing to set the record straight. But today, she closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and let the moment pass. Because she knew something now. Words spoken in emotion rarely bring peace. Had she reacted, it would have led to a tense, painful exchange. Her daughter would have defended herself, Margaret would have dug her heels in, and the dinner would have ended in silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind filled with hurt feelings and regret. Instead, she waited. Later that evening, when her emotions had settled, she gently brought it up. I know you didn't mean it this way, but when you said that earlier, it hurt. I did the best I could raising you. Her daughter's face softened. Oh, Mom, I didn't mean it that way. I'm sorry. Margaret realized something powerful that night. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stay silent in the moment and choose your words when clarity, not emotion, leads the way. But silence isn't just about what you hold back. It's also about knowing when you don't owe an explanation at all. That's what she learned next. 5. When someone criticizes your life choices. It had started with an innocent lunch with an old friend. The conversation was light, filled with laughter, until her friend gave her that look, the one filled with quiet disapproval. So you're still living alone? Don't you ever get lonely? Margaret's grip on her teacup tightened. There it was, the not-so-subtle judgment. She had heard it before, people questioning why she didn't move in with her daughter, or find a companion, or join a senior community. She didn't explain why she valued her independence. She didn't list all the ways she stayed social or the reasons she found joy in her solitude. Because here's the truth. You don't owe anyone a defense for how you choose to live your life. Margaret had finally embraced something freeing. When you are secure in your choices, you don't need anyone else's validation. And just like that, the conversation moved on. No arguments, no back and forth, no emotional drain. Just a quiet confidence that needed no explanation. As Margaret continued this journey, she realized another truth. Sometimes silence isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about letting go of conversations that steal your peace. 6. When the conversation is stealing your peace. Margaret had always been a good listener. She prided herself on being the friend people could call when they needed to vent, to talk, to process. But lately, she noticed something. Some conversations left her feeling drained, heavy, exhausted. Like her friend, Linda. Every call was the same. Complaints about her husband, complaints about her kids, complaints about the neighbors, but never solutions change. Just the same cycle of negativity, over and over. Margaret loved Linda, but after every phone call, she felt like she had absorbed all of Linda's stress without anything changing. Margaret wasn't abandoning Linda. She wasn't ending their friendship. But she was finally learning to protect her peace. to recognize that she didn't have to carry everyone else's burdens at the cost of her well-being. Later, when she felt more balanced, she called Linda back, but this time, she set a boundary. When the conversation started spiraling into the same complaints, Margaret gently steered it towards something lighter. And when Linda tried to pull her back into the cycle, Margaret simply said, "I love you, but I can't carry this today." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was powerful. Margaret had learned something life-changing. Not every conversation deserves your energy. And with that realization, she felt lighter, stronger, more in control of her peace. 7. When someone insults you. Disguised as a joke, Margaret stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the soft lavender scarf around her neck. It was her favorite, light, elegant, and made her feel beautiful. But the moment she walked into her weekly bridge club, she was met with a familiar, biting voice. "Well, look at you, all dressed up. Who are you trying to impress?" The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was the kind that came with a sharp edge, a little too forced, laced with something unsaid. Margaret had heard comments like this before, disguised as humor, but meant to tear down, not lift. Her old self might have laughed along, forced a smile, or even tried to explain herself. But today she simply met their eyes, gave a knowing smile, and said nothing. And in that silence, something happened. The room shifted. The laughter fizzled. The woman who commented suddenly looked uncomfortable. Because silence holds a mirror up to people. It forces them to sit with their words, without the comfort of a reaction to soften the blow. Margaret learned that day that not every comment needs a response. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer of all. It says, "I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing along." She straightened her scarf, took her seat, and played her best game of bridge yet. Because the most beautiful thing about confidence? It doesn't need to be announced, it just is. But not all hurtful words come from others. Sometimes they come from the past, echoes of mistakes, regrets, or old wounds. And that's where Margaret's next lesson came in. 8. When the past is being rehashed. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. Margaret sat at the table, listening to the warm chatter of her family. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. Everything was perfect, until her sister sighed dramatically and said, "Remember that time Margaret almost ruined Thanksgiving?" The room fell silent for a second before laughter erupted. Margaret stiffened. She knew exactly what story this was. The one about the turkey that never cooked through. The one that had been retold at nearly every holiday gathering for years. Once upon a time, she would have jumped in, defended herself, tried to add some humor to soften the embarrassment. But now, she simply took a sip of her tea, let them laugh, and didn't say a word. Because here's the truth. The past only has power if you permit it. Margaret realized something at that moment. This wasn't about the turkey. This was about letting go. She wasn't the same woman who had worried over that half-cooked bird. She had lived, grown, and moved on. So why let an old story steal her joy today? Instead of reacting, she changed the subject. "Speaking of Thanksgiving, did I tell you about the time your grandfather tried to make stuffing from scratch? Now that was a disaster." And just like that, the conversation shifted. Margaret had learned that not every old wound needs to be reopened, and not every past mistake needs to be relived. Sometimes, the best response is to let the past stay in the past. But what about the times when staying silent feels like losing? When your instinct is to correct someone, to prove a point, to make sure the truth is heard? That was Margaret's final and hardest lesson. 9. When peace is more valuable than being right. Margaret sat in the passenger seat of the car as her son drove. It had been a lovely day. Brunch, a walk by the lake, and now a slow drive back home. And then it happened. "Mom, you always forget that I was the one who helped you move after Dad passed, not Jane." Margaret blinked. That wasn't true. Jane had flown in and spent weeks packing boxes, arranging everything. But her son? He had been busy with work, only showing up on moving day. For a split second, she felt the urge to correct him, to set the record straight, to make sure he remembered the truth. But then she looked at him. He was smiling, relaxed, and enjoying the memory he had created for himself. And in that moment, Margaret made a choice to let it go. Did it matter who packed the boxes all those years ago? Would proving him wrong make her feel better? Or would it just turn a beautiful moment into a debate? She smiled softly and said, "You've always been such a big help to me." And just like that, the moment stayed peaceful. Margaret had learned that not every hill is worth dying on. Sometimes, being right isn't as important as being at peace. She looked out the window at the golden light of the setting sun and realized something profound. Silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Because at the end of the day, peace is a choice. And sometimes that choice is simply closing your mouth, taking a deep breath, and letting the moment pass. And with that, Margaret had finally mastered the greatest lesson of all, protecting her peace through the power of silence. You know what's better than winning an argument? Winning at peace. Imagine all the stress, drama, and wasted energy you just saved by mastering the art of silence. Now tell me, which moment of silence hit home for you? Drop a comment, share this with a friend, and subscribe for more life-changing wisdom. Next time, we're tackling the sneaky ways people drain your energy and how to shut it down without guilt. You won't want to miss it.